In the early summer of 2001, the town of Ridgewood, Tennessee, felt like a place where nothing ever changed. The streets curved gently around clusters of old houses, the same houses people had lived in for decades. The town had one high school, one grocery store, and one small police station with a staff so limited that many officers worked double shifts without complaint. People trusted each other, doors were left unlocked, and neighbors still waved across their yards at the end of the day. It was the kind of quiet community where everyone knew everyone else's names, birthdays, and family stories. That was why the city felt shaken years later, because when something terrible happened here, it didn't just happen to one person, it happened to everyone who lived in Ridgewood. On a warm afternoon in late June 2001, 26-year-old Hannah Mercer left her job at a small craft shop near the center of town. She worked there part-time while pursuing her degree in early childhood education. People in Ridgewood always remembered her as someone who carried sunshine in her voice. Her friends said she had a gentle laugh that made even strangers smile. She lived with her younger sister in a modest rental house near the edge of Ridgewood Lake, a quiet freshwater spot surrounded by trees. Hannah often walked home from work since the shop wasn't very far from her neighborhood. She liked taking the scenic route by the lake because it helped her feel calm and inspired for her evening routine of studying and planning for her future career. On that particular afternoon, she told her coworker, a kind woman named Lydia Bram, that she would stop at the lake briefly before heading home. Lydia remembered the moment clearly because Hannah mentioned wanting to watch the water for a few minutes before the sun began lowering. That detail stuck with Lydia for years, because it was the last time she saw Hannah smile. She recalled how Hannah stood outside the shop, waved, and crossed the street, her light blue bag gently swinging against her shoulder. She didn't seem worried, rushed, or bothered. She looked like any young woman at the start of her evening. Later that day, people expected to see Hannah arrive home, but she never walked through the door. When her sister, Nora Mercer, came home after her shift at the local clinic, she noticed the living room lights were still off. At first she thought Hannah had gone to visit a friend or run an errand. But after an hour passed, she checked the kitchen table and saw that Hannah's favorite notebook was still there. She checked the bedroom and noticed that Hannah's bed remained perfectly made. Nora assumed Hannah might have stayed out longer by the lake, but as the clock moved past 9, she felt a growing sense of unease. By sunset, Nora had called two of Hannah's close friends, Valerie Cross and Marina Holt, both of whom said they had not seen her. Nora drove to the lake herself, scanning the shoreline with her headlights before stepping out and calling her sister's name. The water moved in gentle circles from the warm night breeze. The benches were empty and the walking path was quiet. Nothing looked out of place, yet nothing felt right. Nora knew her sister well enough to know Hannah would never ignore calls, never stay out this late without telling someone, and never leave without her usual routine of letting Nora know where she planned to be. When Nora returned home, she made a decision she told officers later she hoped she would never have to make. She called the Ridgewood Police Department to report her sister missing. Officer Colin Wade took the call, and he remembered the tension in Nora's voice even years after the fact. She didn't sound confused or unsure. She sounded terrified but certain something was wrong. Officer Wade drove to the Mercer home to take the initial report. Nora showed him Hannah's belongings, including the notebook, a silver bracelet she usually wore, her house keys, and her favorite jacket. The one thing missing, Nora said, was the small blue handbag Hannah always had with her. Wade asked routine questions. Had Hannah been upset lately? Had she argued with anyone? Was she having troubles at work or school? Nora answered each question with a firm no. Wade wrote everything down, but he sensed that Nora was right. Something about the situation didn't feel like a simple delay or miscommunication. People in Ridgewood rarely went missing, especially young women like Hannah. The search began the following morning. Officers combed the lake trail, walking the narrow paths and checking the smaller side routes people sometimes used. Volunteers joined the effort, including Valerie and Marina, who walked with flashlights even during early dawn hours. The sun rose slowly above the water, casting a pale gold reflection across the surface. The town felt tense and quiet. People whispered Hannah's name in grocery stores, churches, and gas stations, as if speaking too loudly might make the situation worse. Later that day, police found Hannah's blue handbag near a cluster of bushes slightly off the main lake trail. The bag wasn't torn or damaged, but it had been placed in a spot where most people wouldn't see it unless they were searching carefully. Inside, officers found her wallet, a couple of receipts, and a small pack of tissues. What they did not find were her cell phone or anything showing signs of a struggle. The discovery only deepened the mystery. It was as if Hannah walked the path and then simply vanished. Detective Raymond Keller, the lead investigator, arrived at the lake shortly after the bag was found. He was known for being thoughtful and slow to jump to conclusions. He stood quietly for a long moment, examining the scene. He asked officers to carefully bag the items and document the area. He noted that the placement of the bag didn't look accidental. Someone had likely put it there deliberately. Whether that person was Hannah or someone else remained unclear. Keller expanded the search area, instructing officers to check side roads, wooded patches, and even private properties near the lake with owners' permission. With each passing hour, fear spread. Friends and neighbors left food and water for the search teams, and some even organized evening candle gatherings by the lake. Community members stood together holding candles, hoping the warm light would somehow guide Hannah home. But on the fifth day, everything changed. A fisherman named Arthur Lahman called Ridgewood police after noticing something unusual near a shallow part of the lake's far shoreline. Officers arrived quickly and found the body of a young woman lying partially submerged in the water. Keller's expression hardened as he approached the scene. Even before they confirmed the identity, he felt a heavy weight settle on his chest. He knew who it was. The medical examiner later confirmed that the body was Hannah's. Nora collapsed when she heard the news, held tightly by Valerie and Marina. The doctor who examined Hannah noted there were no signs of long-term suffering. The cause of death was determined within the next 24 hours. The findings were heartbreaking but clear. The entire town mourned her, and the lake, once a place of peace, now felt like a place of loss. As detectives began piecing together Hannah's last movements, Keller focused on her walk from the craft shop to the lake. He spoke to Lydia Bram again, and she described how normal everything had seemed when Hannah left work. Keller checked other local businesses along the route. Most workers didn't recall anything out of the ordinary. One store clerk, Mason Drury, mentioned he saw Hannah pass by his shop window around the time she would have reached the lake. She looked calm, he said, as if she were simply enjoying her evening. That detail confirmed she reached the lake without trouble. Keller then turned to people who visited the lake that afternoon. Many families and individuals came forward, but only one account stood out. A retired schoolteacher named Rosemary Gant reported seeing a man near the same bushes where Hannah's bag was eventually found. She didn't get a clear look at his face, but she remembered he wore a dark gray shirt and stood very still, almost like he was watching something. She admitted the sight made her uneasy, but she didn't think much of it at the time because the lake trails were open to everyone. Keller added her statement to the file and asked officers to check for anyone matching that description. They interviewed numerous people around town, including former coworkers, old classmates, and neighbors. Although many leads surfaced, none led to a clear suspect. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation felt like it was slowing. Keller hated the uncertainty. He wanted answers for Nora and the rest of Hannah's family. He wanted justice for a young woman whose life was cut terribly short. But by the end of the year, the case grew cold. Evidence was limited, eyewitness accounts were incomplete, and technology in 2001 did not provide the tools Keller needed to move forward. The town carried the weight of the unsolved mystery every day. Friends and family gathered on anniversaries to honor Hannah's memory. Nora kept her sister's room mostly untouched, telling officers she hoped someday the truth would come forward. Keller promised her he would never forget the case, even as other assignments filled his desk. Over the years, rumors came and went. People whispered names, speculated about strangers passing through town, and wondered whether the person responsible still lived among them. Ridgewood's silence changed after 2001. The once trusting community became careful. Parents walked their children more closely, and people avoided the lake's far shoreline at certain hours. But despite the fears, the hope for answers remained alive. As time moved forward, Ridgewood grew, but the wound from 2001 stayed. Keller continued reviewing the case file periodically, waiting for something, a new detail, a new piece of technology, anything, that might finally shift the investigation forward. He believed that the truth had to be there somewhere, hidden like a faint trace waiting for the right moment to be seen. Years passed, but the story didn't end in 2001. The case simply waited for the day when science, determination, and a long memory would bring it back to life. Detectives returned to the sheriff's office late that night, the kind of night where the halls felt too quiet and the air outside held a stillness that made every decision feel heavier. They spread the early evidence across a long metal table. It was not much, and that was the problem. A woman like Marissa, gentle and consistent in her daily habits, did not simply vanish for no reason. Her friends had said she never missed a shift at the small craft store where she worked, never ignored calls from her younger sister, and always kept the same route home. The more investigators talked to the people who knew her, the more they realized how unusual her disappearance was. That gave the team a clear direction. They needed to rebuild her last full day minute by minute. Two detectives visited the craft store early the next morning. The manager, a soft-spoken man who had worked with Marissa for years, described her as calm and patient with customers. He said she left at her usual time, locked the store carefully, and waved to him through the window before walking to her car. She had mentioned nothing unusual, no argument, no concern, no strange behavior from anyone who came into the shop that day. The security system inside the store was outdated, the type that only recorded short intervals and did not keep tapes for long, so there was no video to study. Still, the detectives noted every detail. Small habits mattered in cases like this. They expanded the search area around the store, asking business owners if they had seen anything. A bakery employee remembered a light-colored pickup truck idling across the street around closing time. She could not describe the driver but said the truck had been there for several minutes before driving off. That detail mattered, because the truck did not belong to anyone working nearby. Another person mentioned seeing a man walking slowly past the craft store window that evening, someone they did not recognize. The descriptions were vague, but investigators added them to the list. By the third day, volunteers from the community joined the official search teams. Dozens of people walked through wooded areas, fields, and the edges of quiet backroads near the county line. They called Marissa's name again and again, their voices stretching across the trees. Detectives followed every tip, no matter how small. Someone thought they had seen her near a convenience store. Another caller believed she had spotted a woman matching her description near a bus stop. Nothing connected, but the team stayed focused. The first true piece of evidence came unexpectedly. A man searching a remote patch of brush noticed something shimmering under the morning sun. When he pushed branches aside, he found a small silver necklace tangled in the leaves. It matched the description of one Marissa always wore, a gift from her mother. Detectives secured the area, photographed everything, and collected the necklace carefully. That section of land became a major search zone, and everyone moved slowly, aware that any detail could matter. A few hours later, they found tire tracks that cut through the soft dirt. The tracks matched a light pickup, possibly the same truck mentioned by the bakery employee. But without a license plate or clear impressions, no immediate match could be made. Still, the necklace changed the direction of the case. It gave investigators a rough idea of where Marissa had been taken. The area was known for its quiet trails and narrow paths that wound deep into the woods. Residents often drove through the backroads because they avoided traffic, but not many people walked them alone at night. Detectives theorized that Marissa had not reached this place willingly. They believed she had been brought there shortly after leaving work. As the days passed, the search widened. The sheriff's office interviewed more people who had been near the county line that night. A few mentioned a pickup truck speeding by. One man remembered hearing a woman's voice in the distance, but he could not tell if it was distress or just someone calling to a friend. The uncertainty made the investigation harder, but the detectives noted everything. They built timelines, drew maps, and studied each route Marissa could have traveled. The pressure grew as the first week ended. Friends and family waited in a nearby community center where volunteers brought food and tried to offer comfort. The investigators checked in frequently, updating them even when the news was minimal. Marissa's sister, who had been close to her, asked detectives again and again if they were sure they had covered every possible location. They reassured her with quiet confidence, even though the growing silence troubled them deeply. 10 days after Marissa vanished, a group searching a creek bed found something partly submerged under the water. A piece of fabric, caught against a large rock, fluttered with the current. It took only a moment for one of the volunteers to recognize the color and pattern. Detectives rushed to the location, moved slowly through the creek, and uncovered the fabric fully. It was part of the shirt Marissa had worn the night she disappeared. A small tear near the seam looked fresh, like it had been ripped during a struggle or caught on something while being dragged. The discovery confirmed what investigators feared. Marissa had been harmed, and the person responsible had tried to conceal evidence. The creek area became the focus of the entire investigation. Forensics teams marked every footprint along the bank, gathered pieces of disturbed earth, and tested the water for fibers or other traces that might have broken free from the clothing. The quiet flow of the creek made it difficult to preserve everything, but they worked carefully. The discovery also prompted an aerial search using a small helicopter borrowed from a nearby agency, a common practice in the early 2000s for wide rural searches. The footage did not reveal anything significant, but it gave detectives a better look at the terrain. A few days later, a hunter walking deeper into the woods noticed a section of ground that looked unusually soft and uneven. Something about the scene felt wrong. He contacted authorities immediately. Detectives arrived and moved slowly, aware of the possibility that they were standing at the most critical point of the investigation. They marked the area, set up a perimeter, and followed protocol step by step. After a careful assessment, they began to examine the disturbed soil. Within hours, they uncovered human remains. The air around the site turned still. Investigators who had been working the case from the start stood quietly as forensic specialists documented every inch of the soil. They lifted each layer with controlled precision. Jewelry fragments, pieces of fabric, and personal items found near the remains matched what Marissa had been wearing the night she disappeared. The discovery confirmed the community's fear, and within the next day, dental records formally identified the remains as hers. The confirmation shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a homicide case. The team returned to the sheriff's office with heavy hearts but sharper focus. They laid out every detail again, this time emphasizing the location of the remains. The position, the shallow depth, and the surrounding environment told a story. Whoever left Marissa there had moved quickly. The burial site was close to a narrow trail, suggesting the person responsible did not want to wander too deep into the woods. The ground showed signs of hurried movement, uneven pressure, and disturbed leaves. It looked like someone nervous or rushed had worked in the dark. Detectives developed a stronger profile of the possible suspect. They believed the person was familiar with the back roads and comfortable navigating the area at night. This was not someone randomly passing through. It felt deliberate. The mention of the pickup truck kept coming back. They reviewed every registration matching light-colored trucks in the region. It was a long list but necessary. They interviewed owners, checked alibis, and inspected vehicles when allowed. Some people cooperated easily. Others seemed uneasy. A few gave explanations that did not match their own earlier statements. Investigators took notes, comparing dates, times, and behaviors. One name stood out. A local man with a simple job, someone who often drove through the county line late at night, someone who had once visited the craft store but claimed he did not know Marissa personally. His truck matched the general description. His timeline had inconsistencies. He had no strong reason to be driving near the woods the night she disappeared. Detectives interviewed him carefully, listening to what he said and what he avoided saying. They asked about his route, his activities, and whether anyone could confirm his whereabouts. He hesitated at certain questions, offering vague answers that raised more suspicion. Still, suspicion alone was not enough. Forensics needed to provide something concrete. They tested soil samples from his truck tires, comparing them with soil from the burial site. The tests in 2001 could show basic similarities but not a perfect match. The results showed the soil types were consistent, but so were many areas in the county. Investigators tested fibers found near the creek and compared them to clothing in his home. The results were inconclusive. It was a step forward, but still not a solution. Weeks turned into months. The community held small gatherings honoring Marissa's memory. Friends shared stories of her kindness and the small ways she had made their days brighter. People still hoped for justice, even though the investigation seemed to move slowly. Detectives kept working. They reviewed old notes, revisited witnesses, and searched for connections that might have been overlooked. They believed the suspect list needed to stay open, because someone who acted with such haste might also slip in the smallest detail if questioned again. As winter approached, the case gradually grew colder. Leads slowed. New information stopped arriving. The weight of unfinished answers settled over everyone who had been part of the search. The sheriff's office kept the case active, but without stronger evidence, they could not move forward with an arrest. The suspect who had drawn their attention remained under quiet surveillance, but nothing new tied him definitively to the crime. Even so, detectives kept the file on their desks instead of the archives. They believed time would reveal what they still lacked. Advances in forensic methods were slowly improving across the country during those years, and cases once thought impossible to solve were finding new paths through updated science. They trusted that patience, persistence, and the careful preservation of every piece of evidence would eventually bring clarity. While months passed, the small rural towns around the county continued their routines. People went to work, seasons changed, new families moved in, and older residents remembered the day the news broke about Marissa. Her story remained a quiet shadow over the community, a reminder of how quickly life could change. The mystery of who harmed her, why she had been taken, and what truly happened during those final moments remained unanswered, waiting for the breakthrough that would one day arrive. The case stayed in a quiet freeze for several years, sitting in a row of files that investigators refused to forget. Even though new cases demanded attention, Marissa's file remained on the desks of detectives who had been there from the start. They often revisited the evidence after long days, hoping to see something they had missed. The man who had been their strongest person of interest still lived in the area during those years, and although he kept a low profile, detectives occasionally checked up on him discreetly. They watched his habits, his work schedule, and the small circle of people he interacted with. He rarely left town. He rarely changed his routine, and that stability, instead of clearing him, made him stand out even more. Someone who had nothing to hide often moved freely. Someone carrying a secret often stayed where he felt safest. During the early 2000s, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation continued updating their forensic methods. DNA testing was slowly becoming more sensitive compared to when the case first began. Evidence stored from older cases across the state was being reevaluated. Detectives working locally knew this and stayed in communication with the state lab, asking if any of the preserved items in Marissa's case could benefit from re-examination. They had saved every possible trace: the necklace, pieces of the torn shirt, fibers found near the creek, small soil samples, and a few faint biological traces that had been too weak to test in 2001. The lab acknowledged the request and placed her case in line behind others. Years passed quietly but not forgotten. In the community, people still mentioned Marissa's name, especially around the anniversary of her disappearance. Her sister visited the burial site and the wooded area where the search teams had once gathered. Each visit reminded her that the person who took her sister's life was still living freely. That thought stayed with her, becoming something she carried every day, even in silence. She left small flowers on the ground and stood there for long moments, hoping that answers would one day reach her, no matter how long it took. Then, in the middle of 2009, the sheriff's office received a call from the state lab. A DNA sample extracted from a small fabric edge collected near the creek had produced a partial profile. Not a full one, but enough to narrow down possibilities. The profile was compared against state databases, and although it did not produce a direct match, it offered a set of genetic markers that eliminated dozens of potential suspects. The partial result was not enough for an arrest, but it was enough to push investigators back into motion. They revisited every note from the early interviews and reassessed the list of trucks owned in the area at that time. Step by step, the suspect list shrank. The man who had stood out during the first investigation became the center of attention again. Detectives interviewed new neighbors, people who had moved into the area after the case went cold. A pattern emerged. Some mentioned he rarely interacted with anyone. Others said he spent long hours in his garage late at night, sometimes leaving before sunrise. His behavior was not criminal on its own, but his unwillingness to speak openly about the night Marissa disappeared continued to raise suspicion. Investigators requested a second interview with him. This time, he seemed more uneasy, shifting his weight, offering brief answers, and repeating that he had nothing to do with the case. When detectives gently mentioned inconsistencies in his original timeline, he grew frustrated and asked to end the conversation. After that interview, detectives obtained permission to collect new DNA samples from him, using a legal process that required careful justification. When the state lab compared his sample to the partial profile from the fabric, they noticed the possibility of a match. It was not a full confirmation, but the shared markers were strong enough to keep the focus on him. The lab requested more time to run expanded tests. In the meantime, investigators began re-interviewing people who had known him in the early 2000s. Old coworkers said he frequently changed moods. Some remembered him showing up late to work around the time Marissa disappeared, looking tired and distracted. Others mentioned he avoided conversations about local news for weeks after the story first broke. In late 2010, the lab called again with updated results. They had been able to recover additional genetic material from the fabric, enough to strengthen the profile. This time, the comparison produced a result that investigators had been waiting for. The DNA markers aligned with the man, creating what the lab described as a highly probable match. It was not absolute yet, but it took the case from uncertainty into near clarity. Detectives presented the new findings to the district attorney, who reviewed the evidence, the timeline, the interviews, and the early suspicions. The DA agreed that it was time to bring the case to a new level. Investigators prepared an arrest plan carefully. They knew the suspect followed a predictable routine which made their work easier. Early one morning, as he stepped out of his house preparing to leave for work, officers approached calmly, identifying themselves, and placed him under arrest. He looked stunned, frozen in place as if he thought the case had been buried forever. He said little as he was taken into custody. The quiet in his voice was different this time, almost resigned. At the sheriff's office, detectives conducted a formal interview. They explained the new evidence, the updated DNA findings, and the inconsistencies in his original statements. At first, he denied everything. He claimed he had never seen Marissa outside of the craft store. He said he did not drive near the county line that night. But the evidence no longer supported his words. As the interview continued, his tone shifted. He grew silent, looked away from the table, and avoided eye contact. Hours passed. Detectives remained patient, knowing that pressure sometimes came not from loud accusations, but from the steady presence of truth. Eventually, he admitted being near the area that night, though he still denied harming her. He said he had seen her but claimed they had only been speaking casually. Detectives let him talk, taking notes quietly. They knew his version did not align with the evidence gathered from the creek, the burial site, and the torn clothing. His shifting story only deepened the inconsistencies. The district attorney moved forward with formal charges. News of the arrest spread through the community in a wave of emotion. People who had known Marissa felt a complex blend of relief and grief, remembering the shock of her disappearance and the long years without answers. Her sister received a phone call from investigators before the news reached the public. She sat quietly, processing the moment she had waited so long to hear. It did not erase the loss, but it lifted the weight of uncertainty that had followed her for nearly a decade. The trial began the following year. Prosecutors presented the evidence step by step. They described the timeline, the discovery of the necklace, the torn fabric, the creek, the burial site, and the updated forensic findings. They explained the DNA results in simple terms for the jury, showing how advances in testing had brought clarity to a case once considered cold. Witnesses from the early investigation testified, including search volunteers, coworkers, and experts from the state lab. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, but the growing chain of details formed a path that the jury followed with clear understanding. After deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty. The courtroom remained silent for a moment, the kind of silence filled not with shock but with the heavy exhale of long-held breath. Marissa's sister held her hands tightly together, eyes lowered, absorbing the moment. The man who had been part of the town for years was taken away to begin his sentence, and the chapter that had once seemed frozen finally moved forward. In the months that followed, the community found a slow but genuine sense of peace. People visited the wooded trail again, standing near the area where the search teams had once gathered. Some left flowers. Others simply paused, remembering her gentle presence. The sheriff's office kept her case file on display for a time, not as a reminder of tragedy, but as a symbol of perseverance. The story became part of local memory, something people spoke of with respect and quiet gratitude. Marissa's sister continued her visits to the site, but now she walked with a calmer expression, knowing the truth had finally come and justice had found its way through the years. The town moved gently forward, carrying her memory with a steadier heart, grateful for the answers that had taken so long to arrive.